Fisch. Fisch is a game centered around catching fish, selling them for profit, and filling out the bestiary by collecting every fish available. Some fish can also spawn with mutations, which increase their value and make them more profitable. The game received updates almost every day, which caused it to rapidly grow in popularity. Fisch was also simple, calming, and not pay to win. While there were a few game passes that offered minor gameplay benefits, the overall balance of the game remained fair and unbroken. Fisch reached over 3 billion visits, averaged around 500,000 concurrent players, and even became the #1 game on Roblox at one point. However, only a few months later, the game's creator, Woozy Nate, made a major mistake that single-handedly caused the game to decline. He sold Fisch to a company called Do Big Studios, who introduced a large number of unnecessary and strange updates. They eventually turned the game into a pay-to-win experience, allowing players to purchase nearly everything with Robux. As the community noticed what was happening, most players stopped playing, and the average player count dropped to around 10,000. Fortunately, Nate later bought the game back, which sparked a comeback for Fisch, bringing the average player count back up to around 100,000. Blade Ball is a straightforward but high-pressure game where multiple players face off against a rapidly moving ball and a blade. The ball repeatedly locks onto a random player, and your sole objective is to strike it back with perfect timing. Miss the hit, and you're eliminated. Each successful deflection sends the ball flying toward another player, repeating the process until only one person remains. Blade Ball released in late 2023 by Chunch and immediately took off, quickly turning into one of the biggest games on the platform. By the end of 2023, it had already surpassed 2.6 billion visits and was pulling in hundreds of thousands of daily players. It even set a record as the fastest Roblox game to ever reach 1 billion visits, achieving it in roughly 50 days. However, as time passed, the game slowly started losing players for the same reason that led to Fisch's decline. Blade Ball was owned by Doobie Games, which became heavily criticized for adding excessive pay-to-win mechanics. Players grew angry over gambling-like systems such as loot crates with extremely low odds, limited-time skins, and other monetized features. As more of these controversial mechanics were introduced, frustration within the community continued to grow, and the player count steadily fell. Today, Blade Ball averages around 20,000 players. Bed Wars. Roblox Bed Wars launched in May 2021 and rapidly became one of the platform's most popular games. It's Roblox's version of Minecraft's Bed Wars mode. Each team has a bed that allows players to respawn, but once that bed is destroyed by another team, respawning is no longer possible. If you die without a bed, you're eliminated. The objective is to destroy every other team's bed and defeat them, while defending your own bed and collecting resources from generators and the shop to upgrade gear and tools. Roblox Bed Wars has accumulated over 10 billion visits and reached an average of around 70,000 players during its peak. Popular YouTubers like Tanker and DB Plays began posting content on the game, earning millions of views and pushing its popularity even further. With its growing success, the game received frequent updates that kept players engaged, and the introduction of Ranked made the experience far more competitive. Eventually, though, players began to lose interest, feeling that the game had become repetitive. Updates started to feel recycled, often revolving around the same additions like Lucky Blocks, kits, or items. On top of that, pay-to-win elements became more prominent, leaving free-to-play players feeling heavily disadvantaged. Many players also felt that the developers were ignoring community feedback and criticism. Because of this, Bed Wars now averages about 20,000 players, and that number continues to decline. Dead Rails. Dead Rails is a post-apocalyptic survival game where players live aboard a moving train while trying to make their way to Mexico. Along the journey, you gather fuel, scavenge supplies, manage resources, and defend yourself against various monsters. The gameplay stood out because players had to balance maintaining the train with surviving constant threats. At its peak, Dead Rails attracted major YouTubers like Flamingo and Queso. The game reached over 5.7 billion visits and hit a peak of 1 million concurrent players, even becoming the #1 game on Roblox for a time. During this period, it consistently averaged around 500,000 players online. Over time, however, interest began to fade. Updates took longer and longer to release, and when new content finally arrived, it was often small, underwhelming, and not worth the wait. Gradually, the excitement disappeared, and the game started to feel dull and outdated. Today, Dead Rails averages around 20,000 players, a massive drop from its peak, losing over 90% of its player base, not because the gameplay changed, but because the game failed to evolve. Rainbow Friends. Rainbow Friends is a cooperative horror game where players must complete objectives while being chased by colorful, monster-like enemies known as the Rainbow Friends. The game takes place in an abandoned amusement park and is divided into chapters, each featuring tasks players must complete in order to escape. Across 5 nights, players collect items, restore power, and move through different areas while avoiding the creatures roaming the map. At its peak, Rainbow Friends was incredibly popular, reaching over 4.6 billion visits and averaging around 70,000 players. The hype grew so large that Rainbow Friends merchandise even appeared in physical stores, showing how massive the game had become. Despite this success, the popularity didn't last long. The player count dropped quickly, struggling to even reach 10,000 players. The decline was fast, and it mostly stemmed from one major problem. After the release of its final chapter, the game was essentially left behind. These chapter updates were exactly what players were most excited for, and once they stopped, there was nothing left to keep interest alive. One of the creators, Roy Stanford, already had a track record of abandoning his projects, and Rainbow Friends followed that same pattern. His first major game, Redwood Prison, reached just under 300 million visits, while another title he created, Baker's Valley, accumulated 190 million visits. Despite their success, both games were eventually left without updates. Rainbow Friends was no exception. With no new content to support the game, the player base slowly drifted away, and the game nearly faded out entirely. Grow a Garden. Grow a Garden has a very simple premise. Build the best garden possible. Players begin by planting basic seeds, saving money to unlock better ones, and gradually progressing toward crops that earn higher and higher profits. Along the way, pets, gear, sprinklers, and other tools help speed up progress and expand gardens more efficiently. For a time, this formula worked extremely well. The game surpassed 33 billion visits and even held the record for the highest number of concurrent players, reaching around 21 million before being overtaken by Steal a Brain Rock, which peaked at 25 million. At its highest point, Grow a Garden averaged between 1 and 2 million concurrent players, making it the most played game on the platform. However, only a few months later, the game began to lose momentum. It now averages around 200,000 players, and that number continues to decline. The biggest issue was repetition. Players became bored, as updates and admin events felt repetitive and failed to introduce any meaningful changes. There was a noticeable lack of fresh ideas or new mechanics to keep things engaging. Another major factor was the addition of too many overpowered crops that generated massive amounts of money, which made the in-game currency feel almost worthless. Toilet Tower Defense. Toilet Tower Defense, also known as TTD, is a traditional tower defense game with a unique theme. Players choose from 6 different maps and must protect their base from waves of enemy toilets using a variety of towers, including clocks, drills, TVs, speakers, and cameras, with both male and female units. After each match, players earn currency that can be used to unlock stronger units and towers through a gacha-style system. The game was inspired by the Skibbity Toilet YouTube series, which helped to gain massive attention early on. TTD reached just over 6 billion visits and averaged around 100,000 players at its peak. Over time, however, its growth began to slow. Updates started taking up to a month to release, and each update felt more disappointing than the last. The game continued adding increasingly overpowered units, while also becoming heavily pay-to-win, making many players feel pressured to spend Robux just to stay competitive. Things worsened when a popular TTD YouTuber named Inhei was exposed for serious issues, which added even more negativity to the game's reputation. All of these factors combined gradually damaged the game's image and player base. Today, TTD sits at record lows, struggling to even average around 3,000 players.